to start something talking about being grateful. We're certainly grateful for all our mothers have done for us. Who saw back in the 90s the movie Grumpy Old Men? Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau and Anne Margaret. And then they went over so well they did a sequel, The Grumpier Old Men. Yeah. That's not what this is about. Actually, the opposite. The opposite. The biblical definition of gratitude is gratitude is the practice of actively remembering and expressing the grace, which is benefits we do not deserve, and the goodness bestowed in our lives. Definition of God's grace is God's loving action towards us that we don't deserve, don't warrant. It's God's favor. And gratitude is part of that. Do you think there's a difference between being thankful and being grateful? Kind of the same, but we're going to find out there's a huge difference. We'll talk about that each and every day. The Bible says that the practice of gratitude gives us a life here on earth and later in heaven significance. Through gratitude, we appreciate life's goodness, which compels us to pay it forward. Gratitude creates within us a deep sense of happiness and satisfaction, which in turn enriches our relationships, nurtures the formation of new friendships, and underlines the very foundation of human society. So the deal with gratitude, the scholars say, is that it's freely given from God, and we talk about God's love and God's forgiveness, all that stuff that God puts into our hearts that we extend to others. And what the scholars say here is that we pay it forward. When we receive gratitude, really receive gratitude, that we're going to pay it forward and extend that gratitude to others. And I think that's one of the basic differences between thankfulness and gratitude. Gratitude is a little deeper. In the Bible, the word gratitude comes from the Greek word Eucharistos, and the root word for that is charis, which means freely given, freely given. And sometimes we'll call the communion the Eucharist, because it's a great Thanksgiving, freely given. It's important to note that the gratitude we are talking about is much more than a thank you utterance. Practicing Eucharist that flows out of a sentiment of thankfulness. The gratitude for God's grace is more than a mere recognition of God's grace, but a felt response which intrinsically demands that we express this response. In other words, when we really receive it, we're going to give it back out. You ever notice some people go through life with the glass half full rather than half empty? I think that's a lot about what this is talking about. I think about a couple big biblical moms. Lesser known ladies. Polka Bat. Anybody know who she was? Polka Bat lived about 3,400 years ago, 3,200 years ago. And this is a time when the Israelites, the Hebrews, were under forced labor in Egypt. We talk about the Exodus. For over 400 years, they lived in captivity, hard labor. There came a time when the Pharaoh realized, and I don't know if he did a census, we just did one in Illinois, lost people. They were gaining people, but the Pharaoh noticed that they're gaining Hebrews, their slaves, were populating like crazy. And he got paranoid. He goes, at some point, there's going to be more of them than us. And he goes, that's not good, because it might be an insurrection, or they may team up with another country and overthrow us. So he said, you got to do something. And in his plan was that he put an edict out that all baby boys born would be killed. That was his plan. Every baby boy would be thrown in the Nile. Not a very good plan. Kind of short-sighted when you think about that. He's just killing off his next generation of slaves. But that was the deal. That was the deal. There was a lady named Polka Bat that became with child. And can you imagine with that edict out? Didn't have ultrasounds back there, so she didn't know if she's having a boy or a girl. All she knows, she's really hoping for a girl. But she birthed a beautiful, bouncing baby boy. One that's supposed to be thrown in the Nile. And she held her baby for the first time, and that mother's love took over. And she goes, no way, that's going to happen to this baby. And so she hid him for a few months, but she knew that at some point she was going to have to do something, because she couldn't hide him forever. And she happened to know that the Pharaoh's daughter bathed in the Nile this time every day. Same place, same time. And so her plan was that she took a basket laced it with tar so it would float. And she's going to place her baby in the basket in the Nile River, about where the Pharaoh's daughter would have to see it, in some reeds. And then she had the little baby's sister hide in the weeds and see what happened. And sure enough, the Pharaoh's daughter and the attendants come out to bathe, and the baby starts crying. The attendants give her this baby, and she goes, well, it's a Hebrew baby. And she fell in love with the baby. Then his sister pops out and says, you know, what if I have one of the Hebrew women nurse the baby for you, then we'll bring it to the temple. She goes, great idea. So mom got to birth the baby for a few months, and then they presented the baby at the temple, and Pharaoh's daughter named him Moses, which means I drew him out of the water. That's how Moses came to be. She loved her son, you know, and I don't know her thought process, but when she was crafting that basket with tar, she didn't know whether that might be a coffin or it might be a vessel of promise and hope. I mean, it could have sank, right? I don't know if the Nile has alligators. It probably does. Or maybe the current would take it downstream. Or better yet, maybe when the Pharaoh's daughter saw it, she would obey her father and throw it back in the river. You know, there's a lot going on. But that's not what happened. But through her love and sacrifice, and she never probably saw Moses again, because he went to live in the temple for the next 40 years. She probably never saw him again, and she would have known that. That's quite a sacrifice. But that was a mother's love. And then there's Hannah. Hannah would have been a few hundred years later than that. Hannah was married to Elkanah, who had another wife, Peninnah, and Peninnah was able to conceive a child. And in this culture, it was very, very important that a wife have a baby boy to keep the name going. And it was dishonorable for a wife that if she couldn't do that. And that really bothered Hannah. And it didn't help that her rival, Peninnah, always threw that in her face, you know, I had a child, but you didn't. Elkanah was a righteous man. He would tell her not to worry about it, you know, that he loved her. He says, you know, I love you more than 10 sons. But that didn't settle her heart. So one day she's in the temple, and she's fervently praying to God for a baby boy. And she says, if you give me a baby boy, I will dedicate him back to you, and he'll live in the temple. And she's kind of mouthing her prayers, I guess. Well, Eli was a priest, and he saw her. He thought she was drunk. So he goes over and accuses her of having too much wine in the temple. And she goes, no, you got it wrong. And in 1 Samuel, it's written, she goes, no. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I've been praying here out of my grief, great anguish and grief. Eli answered, go in peace. May the God of Israel grant you what you've asked of him. And God blessed Hannah with a beautiful boy. And she dedicated him back to the temple. She weaned him. I think that was about a 90-day thing. And gave him to Eli, and he named him Samuel. And Samuel means, because I asked the Lord for him. And he grew up in the temple. I would guess mom got to see his son once in a while. She went to the temple. She would see him. But the thing is, we know Samuel from the Bible as a great prophet, that it was Samuel that anointed little shepherd boy David as the next king of Israel. So out of the love of these two women, these two mothers, we have Moses, who we know as probably the defining character of the Old Testament. The Exodus is the defining story of the Old Testament, which he was part of. And then Samuel, a great prophet, King David. Mother's love. So as I think about those two ladies, and the common thread was love and sacrifice. And God used them in a mighty way, that they lived lives of significance. And I think that's going to be one of the things that we all yearn for, is to be significant in one way or the other, to have significance in our lives. Amy Grant, the Christian singer and songwriter, she has a prayer that she prays every day. And she goes, Lord, lead me today to those I need, and to those that need me. And let something I do have eternal significance. I think we all yearn for that. There's a poem that I use at funerals, and it came from a funeral that I did a long time ago. I had a hospice patient. His name was Dog Peterson, and I think I preached about Dog once. He was a bomber pilot in World War II. Got shot down 2 or 3 times and walked away every time. Got out of the service, and he worked for the Weather Service, flying airplanes in Alaska, fetching weather balloons that went down. And I think he made 3 or 4 forced landings and lived all through that. Then he flew for the oil lines, oil companies, checking oil lines. Lots of danger. And then when he passed, his wife asked me to do the service. And I said, sure, but I want you to use this poem. And I've used it many times since. It's called The Dash. And it goes, I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on her tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of her birth and spoke the following date with tears. But he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time that she spent alive on earth. And not only those who loved her know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love and how we spend our dash. That's pretty cool, isn't it? What matters is our dash. And I think our dash is comprised a lot of gratitude, how we go through life. The Apostle Paul wrote in the book of Galatians, the fruits of the spirits, and there's 9 of them. I don't know if I'll get them right. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, self-control, faithfulness, and generosity. And the scholars say that being grateful, living a life of gratitude is the foundation of all that. And I kind of like that. So we're going to talk more about that in the next few weeks. So then, there's another half to this poem. I don't share this at funerals. I don't think it's appropriate. But it asks a question. It says, so think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that can still be rearranged. If we could just slow down enough to consider what's true and real, and always try to understand the way other people feel, and be less quick to anger, and show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect, and more often wear a smile, remembering that this special dash might only last a little while. So when your eulogy is being read with your life's action to rehash, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? Isn't that cool? A little bit of a challenge at the end there, how we spend our dash. And I think a lot of it has to do with living a life of gratitude. Be happy with what we have. To be happy with what we have and not always wanting more. So I'm going to conclude with a Mother's Day poem called A Mother's Love. And I think it really speaks to Polka Bat and Hannah. It says, there is no love like a mother's love, no stronger bond on earth, like the precious bond that comes from God to a mother when she gives birth. A mother's love is forever strong, never changing for the time. And when her children need her most, a mother's love will shine. God bless these special mothers. God bless them, everyone, for all the tears and heartache and for the special work they've done. When her days on earth are over, a mother's love lives on, through many generations with God's blessing on each one. Be thankful for our mothers, for they love with a higher love, from the power God has given and the strength from up above. Sound like a mother? Sounds like Polka Bat and Hannah. Amen?